Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is August 1st, finally a football month around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about walk-ons. Obviously, we will not have walk-ons in college football anymore, and that definitely does take some flavor out of the sport, but we still have plenty of great stories to break down, and I'll obviously get to that in the first segment. Then we'll get into my Big 12 breakdown. We'll get into quick thoughts on every team. Then we'll get into my predictions for the season. A very weird conference. I'll just leave it at that. Definitely a lot of teams up at the top that have plenty to say about this conference this upcoming year. Then we'll get into a little talk around some of the different teams and programs that are kind of sitting under the surface, that are starting to emerge and starting to click on the recruiting trail, in the behind the scenes NIL. All of the different things are starting to move in the right direction, and I think they might just be on the verge of something really special at these 5 programs. Then we'll get into my Thursday hot take, and I will break down how I think rotations and depth are by far the most important thing in this college football season, and I'll break down a couple of different examples throughout the college football world that you need to watch throughout this year. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for the both of us. So if you want to use that, again, that is gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's talk about walk-ons. Obviously, we are looking at a new future without walk-ons in it. We went from 120 players on a college football roster down to 105, and there are no more scholarship restrictions. And it seems like the colleges are going to take advantage of that, likely push more money into football in terms of scholarships, and definitely be able to allocate a little bit more resources to some other sports as well. I think baseball is getting a boost, softball as well, which we'll break down throughout this, but it's definitely one of those contentious topics. It's something that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on. Some coaches are not big fans of it because obviously it makes their job a little bit harder. Losing 15 players are very valuable players to that program, so it definitely makes that job a little bit harder, definitely makes it a little bit more difficult to go into, and Dabo Swinney kind of put it as no coach really wants this, and I understand that. That's definitely something that I think is held by a lot of coaches. They don't necessarily love the new future that they're getting into, especially with the roster size, but there are a number of different reasons why this is likely something that probably had to happen. And obviously, there's a number of different things that go into this, and there are so many different things to kind of break down with this. But overall, I mean, you look at kind of the world of college sports and college football in particular, and you see all of the energy, all of the money, all of the resources that are put towards football and kind of lean in that direction. We're starting to kind of lean a little bit back, right? We're starting to give a little bit more to baseball. I believe they're going from 11.7 scholarships up to 34, and then softball is going from 12 to 25. And while I don't necessarily think all of those scholarships will be used by those two teams, I do think they'll get a little bit of a boost, and that's super important for those smaller sports. So it is kind of that battle between, you want college football to be as great as it possibly can be, but on the other side of things, you don't necessarily want to shortchange the other sports in the college sports landscape. So overall, this is one of those decisions that it doesn't look great, you definitely don't love it. You lose, stories like Baker Mayfield, like Stetson Bennett, that made the most of a situation that was not going to be easy and became college football legends. That's obviously something that we all hold very near and dear, and I'm very much a part of that group that doesn't necessarily love this change. I absolutely love the story of walk-ons and being able to look at, a kid that finds his way from a walk-on role to a starting quarterback to a 2-time champion like Stetson Bennett did is a really magical thing, and it's one of the special things about this sport. There a million different examples. Aiden O'Connell was a finalist for the Burlsworth Trophy in his senior year, which is given out to the most accomplished, the best walk-on, or someone that used to be a walk-on in their school. So Stetson Bennett won it a couple of times, or I believe once at least his senior season. So there's a number of different things that kind of go into this, and the Burlsworth Trophy is something I want to talk about here for a second because it has a lot of history behind it, and it definitely should. Brandon Burlsworth is a very, very fantastic player that played at Arkansas. He's right there, but this is someone that had a really, really remarkable college football career. He was one of the best walk-ons that has ever really played college football. He went to his dream school of Arkansas, had a couple of different smaller offers, but decided to go to Arkansas. That's where he wanted to be, and ended up being really remarkable. Had a number of All-American offensive guard picks. He was in the All-American team as an offensive guard, was drafted in the third round of the NFL draft. Unfortunately, 11 days later, he died in a car accident, so his family set up this trophy in his honor, and I think it's something that we likely want to keep intact in college sports, and it's kind of an interesting one because I don't really know how they go about it. Obviously, they do have kind of a committee that puts together the winners and the finalists and all of those things for that award. So hypothetically, they could continue doing that. And it could just not have the moniker of walk-on, but it definitely does take a little bit away from that. So that's definitely one of the things that you don't love to see. There's no two ways about that, and definitely want to keep that trophy as important as it is right now, because a lot of kids look at that and they see something that they really, really want to win. Hunter Renfrow was absolutely someone that won this award, made a lot of noise in college while he was at Clemson, and has been really good for the Raiders when he got into the NFL. So overall, when you talk about walk-ons, they are the best stories in college sports. I think everyone kind of agrees with that, whether you're talking about J.J. Watt or you're talking about Aiden O'Connell or Stetson Bennett or Baker Mayfield. There are so many incredible stories of walk-ons making it from a position that none of us would really be able to deal with to being the star of a team, being the one that leads them to national titles, and in the case of Stetson Bennett, become probably definitely the most decorated, probably not the best, but definitely the most decorated Georgia athlete of all time. So I think that's one of those things that you love those stories. There's no two ways about that, and it's one of those things that definitely does hurt a little bit because you want those stories going forward, and you don't necessarily want, anything to be taken away from those kids that have made their way up from the walk-on ranks. The other thing about this is it does help smaller sports, which is something that I got into and I definitely think is the, good part of this, definitely something that helps those smaller sports. But on the other side of this, I do think we still have great stories in this sport. I do think there's still going to be people that had made it from the fourth or third string of their roster who were, 2 stars or 3 stars that just went to a school because they were able to find a way to get a scholarship or they were able to get an offer and they decided to go to Georgia or they decided to go to Texas when they likely weren't going to start their first couple of years, and then they battle through that and they find a way onto a starting roster and make some noise. So I still think there are going to be incredible stories. Now, they won't have the walk-on moniker next to them and they will be getting a scholarship, but it doesn't necessarily change the story, right? It doesn't necessarily change how incredible it is what this kid is doing, and obviously it changes his outside of football life quite a bit because, don't have to worry about paying for school and all of that different type of stuff, but overall, I think it's one of those things that he's still going to show up to practice every day knowing that he has to fight. He's still going to show up to practice every day knowing that he's not as talented as the other kids on the field, and he's got to work a little bit harder to get where he wants to go. So I still think there will be those stories. I still think there will be remarkable tales of, kids finding their way through a crazy world of college football and maybe taking an offer that isn't necessarily the best in terms of playing time, but that's where they want to be, and they battle through and they find their way into a starting role. So I still think there's stories out there. I don't necessarily think you have to have the walk-on moniker to be a remarkable story in this sport. Now, it does kind of take away from it just a little bit. I'm not going to sit here and act like it's the exact same because walk-ons battle through much more than what they battle through on the football field. You have to worry about paying your bills for school, and you have to worry about all this different stuff before you get that scholarship. And then even after you do, you have to worry about a million different other things like keeping your job, which is not as easy for a former walk-on as it is for everyone else. So this is kind of the reality of this sport, and I think when you look down the road 5, 10 years, 15 years even, and you realize, not having walk-ons is definitely going to be something that makes this just a little bit less special. The world of college football just a little bit less special. The world of college sports in a lot of ways a little bit less special because those are the stories you love to hear. Charlie Condon was a baseball player for Georgia this last year. Got drafted 3rd overall. He was a walk-on when he came in. And obviously there's less scholarships to give out over there. But regardless, it's a remarkable story. It's something that everyone kind of gravitates towards. Baker Mayfield the exact same way. He walked on at 2 different universities, Texas Tech and Oklahoma. And it was remarkable to watch him at both. So I do think it's one of those things that we're going to have to find a way to still celebrate those kids, because those kids will still be out there. It won't necessarily be the same type of story. It won't necessarily be the same type of battles that some of the walk-ons in the past have fought, but there's still stories out there that deserve to be highlighted, that deserve to be possibly on the same level as those walk-on awards in the past. So it's one of those things that, yes, it is the end of an era. Yes, it is something that ruined some of the big time storylines in the sport and some of the greatest things that we've had in the sport's history, like Brandon Burlsworth's history and his legacy that he left behind, is one of the most remarkable things we have in the sport. But overall, when you look at the health of college sports and you look at the reality of college football going forward, I don't know if it changes all that much, at least from a fan's perspective. I think it does change, the administrative side, how you go about recruiting, how you go about offers, how coaches go about building their roster, that type of thing. But I think from a fan's perspective, we're still going to be watching a 3 or 2-star kid find his way into a starting roster and make some noise. That's still going to be really cool to watch. There's no two ways about that. So I do think it's one of those things that we are going to have to look a little bit harder to find these remarkable stories. We are going to have to maybe look back at what the kid was recruited as and what offers he had and that type of thing, but the stories will still be there. There will still be remarkable stories that are kind of the walk-on ilk, are kind of that, same build in terms of what they went through, in terms of how they battle, in terms of the legacy they left behind at their university. So this is obviously something that I don't think any of us wanted. I don't think any of us woke up and wanted walk-ons to go away, wanted them to not be a part of college football. But I think when you look at the entire picture and you look at the whole landscape of college sports overall, it's hard for me to sit here and say that it's overall a terrible thing for college sports. I think it's overall a good thing for college sports. It hurts college football a little bit, but we still have those incredible stories that will come out throughout the year, and we will obviously unpack them on here as they do. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to break down the Big 12 teams, a quick thoughts on every team, and then obviously we'll get into our predictions in the third segment. But stick with us, and we'll be right back with a Big 12 breakdown.